Hello, Accounting Seminar 2021-2022. I am happy that you have invited me to do this presentation on budgeting this evening. The presentation will take us through what is budgeting, the importance of budgeting, preparing a budget, and a little bit about your procurement process and your procurement plan. Now, what is a budget? Many of us have from time to time prepare budgets, be it a simple budget or a complex budget. All right, and so your budget is really an expression of the plans you have with a quantitative measure. So you're assigning a monetary value to each aspect of your planning process or the activities that will be included in your plan. Now, once we have identified the activities, and of course, a lot of times we are accustomed to just scribbling on paper the things that we need to do as an individual or as a company. And then afterwards, we may do some research to find out what are the costs associated with those activities. But putting that plan together is what is budgeting. So budgeting is really the process of creating a plan to spend your money. Now, why is it important for us to budget? Of course, a lot of times as individuals, we are only thinking about our income and expenses. How much will I be paid this week or this month from my work? If I do have side jobs, how much will those side jobs be paying me? If I am getting funds through a financier, be it our parents, how much will I get from my parents this week for an allowance? And of course, you're thinking about how much of this allowance or how much of this income or these income will I be spending for the activities that I've just laid out pretty on paper to go forth with? Is it that my income is more than my expenses? Are they simply balancing out? Or is there money left over for savings and for emergencies? Now, let's look at some of the importance of having a budget. Now, your budget ensures the achievement of your objectives. And this is so because once you have assigned a monetary value to the activities, it is clear from each assignment that you are either able to go through all the processes comfortably based on your income, or you may have to do some alterations. You may have to take off some items if it is that you want to achieve your objectives and within budget. Of course, it forces you to plan. Now, it's always important or it's always necessary to have a plan. We talk about it being a control measure and a way of evaluating performance. Having gone through all the processes, you are now able to look at what you have budgeted to do or what you had budgeted to do and what you have done. It's necessary also to look at, are we doing it at the end, or are we going to be making some assessments as we go along, control? Now, if you're assessing as you go along, then it's going to highlight the path on which you are taking. So the path here is, are we sticking to the budget? If we are not sticking to the budget, where did we go wrong? If it is that we didn't do anything wrong, but we may have done poor research when we are assigning an amount to each activity, then we may have to go back to the drawing board and make some changes. And then, of course, do a new trajectory of where we want to go and how we're going to get there. After we have completed each assignment, then it's necessary for us to now go back and look at, have I done what I had set out to do as an individual or as a company? Did I do it right? If I did, is there any room for changes? Changes here being an update. As an individual and as a company, we are always supposed to be thinking about how we can do it better the next time around. And efficiency will play a very important role, having done it more than one time and looking at how changes can be made. A lot of persons don't think about a budget being an important factor in communication, but it is. Let's talk about this. For this seminar body, you will be required to plan events. Those events will, of course, take into consideration a number of committees that will come together to ensure the successful achievement of those activities. So if we're talking about logistics, for example, being an integral committee to executing those plans and ensuring that the events take place and they are done smoothly, then of course, logistics need to know what their role is. The accounting department will also need to know what their role will be in ensuring that we achieve the objectives. Sponsorship, fundraising, and marketing will also need to know what their role is going to be. Professionalism will have to know what their role is going to be. And most importantly, our audit committee will need to know what their role is going to be in ensuring that we achieve our objectives. So it's very important to communicate the plans. Once we have communicated the plans to each committee, then they become aware of where they stand in the coordination of those activities. And of course, what resources they will need to have in order to ensure the event is successful. So again, budgeting is important as it assists with communication, coordination, and resource allocation. Now, of course, earlier I spoke about us doing budgets on a piece of paper. Some of us may use an Excel sheet. Some of us are aware of more complex budget, or we are accustomed to preparing more complex budget. And so I'm going to talk about few of the budgets. There are more budgets than the types that we will discuss, but we're going to talk about the incremental budget. We're going to talk about the zero-based budget, and of course, your master budget. What is an incremental budget? Now, I'd like to take us back to Intro to Management Accounting, Unit 1, when we look at incremental cost. What is an increment? What is the importance of an increment, if any at all? And so if we can identify what an increment is, then it's easy to define an incremental budget. Now, your incremental budget is a budget whereby next year's budget is based on actual results of the current financial year. Now, your current financial year budget will be increased by an amount usually based on the inflation rate. So let's talk about seminar, the events we will have to plan. How are we going to assign an amount to those activities that we have to plan? Already, some of you have made contact with the previous year's seminar students, and you have been asking questions about what was done, how it was it done successfully, what we can do this year, as opposed to what you have done or what were the mistakes made, so you can make those corrections. Nothing is wrong with seeking some information that will help you in your job. And again, what some persons will do is to also get the information as it relates to the financial statements or those activities that were planned and the proposal that went along with the fundraising and marketing activities. And all you're simply doing is updating those line items on that budget and call it yours. That's what an incremental budget is. Now, these are budgets that are mainly used by government entities. However, budgets like these encourage inefficiencies. Because if we are simply increasing our budget line items by a particular percentage, let's say the inflation rate, then some items on your budget may have increased by more than the inflation rate, some less. So what you may find happening at the end is that you are spending more than you had budgeted to spend. So we don't want to use the incremental budget, especially for seminar. Now, your zero-based budget is a budget where the activities of expenditure has to be justified before it is included in your budget. Now, if you know how your facilitators, especially your coordinator, operates, then anything that goes out there in the public space about accounting seminar must be justified by us, including expenditures. So what do you think is happening here? Will it be the one that we will recommend for seminar? Let's see. Now let's talk a little bit more about zero-based budget. The next point says, in other words, each activity starts from scratch or zero at the beginning of the budget period. So yes, you have previous seminars budget, you have their proposal, you have their marketing plan, and included in those are some budgets. Nothing is wrong with that. But if you are going to include items from the previous years within your budget, if you feel it necessary, we also want to know why is it necessary. So it must be justified. All right. And of course, it must be value for money before we will say, okay. Then we have the master budget. Now, your master budget coordinates the activities of an organization. It is what we consider or call a core working document. This core working document is like a business plan that includes a coordinated set of detailed operating schedules and financial statements, including your receipts and disbursements. All right, so what are our activities that will see monies coming in, and what are the activities that will see monies going out? So we're talking about inflows and outflows. Now, the major aspect of your master budget is that it is broken down into two parts. You have the operating budgets and you have the financial budgets. All right, so if we're talking about sales, if you're planning an event, we need to see your sales budget. How much do you budget to sell if you're selling items? If we're talking about, for example, a party, what are you selling? You're selling tickets. How many tickets do you plan to sell? What will be the cost of the ticket? And that will give you your sales figure. If you're doing purchasing, then of course we'd want to see your purchases budget. What are the items you'll be purchasing and in what quantity? All right, what will be your cost of sales if they're going to have an event and will indeed have a cost of sales budget? So all those budgets are budgets we're expecting to see in your event proposal under the budget section. Now, if we're talking about preparing your seminars budget, all of what I just mentioned earlier are things that will be included in your seminar budget. It will be a compilation or a composition of your zero-based budget and also your master budget. So we recommend the zero-based budget here because it is a budget that starts from zero or scratch, and each item on it is justified. All right. Now, in terms of the budget, for each item that is a fundraising activity, we must see where the revenue will come in. And of course, for us to undertake that activity, it must be that we will make a profit, meaning here that our expenses cannot be greater than our revenue. All right, so we're looking at our sources of income. We also will have to look at the expenses. So again, what are the events? What will be the expenses attached to those events? And I should also note here that you should always include your miscellaneous costs. Your miscellaneous costs here are costs that you will incur that was never budgeted for. So there must be some funds assigned or earmarked for miscellaneous expenses. My last point here says continuous adjustments may be required. And I say continuous adjustments because earlier mentioned that you may have to at some point do some control mechanisms, looking at what you just did or an aspect of it and make changes where necessary in order to foster growth if it is that we are looking to meet a certain objectives. So you may have to make some changes if it is that items of expenses are not in line with what you want to do. Let me give you an example of that. Before the whole pandemic, we were planning for an event. The amount that we had budgeted for decorating the venue was way more than we were hoping to spend. And again, students, when we get to talking about procurement, for example, you will see how important it is to ensure that you identify your suppliers from early and you have communication with them in order to ensure you're getting value for money. All right. And so it was way more than we expected in terms of the cost to decorate the venue. What we had to do at this point is to make some strategic changes to our budget. What line item could we now reduce in order to cover the additional expense that we just incur for decorations? All right. And we're now looking at the cost of persons working, so labor cost. And we had to now assign students to do some of the work in association with the company. All right. And again, it is important to always assess as you go along so you can make those necessary changes. Now, of course, how are we going to stay within budget? The goals that you are setting or the activities that you're planning must be activities that are smart. So we're not just planning events and executing those events to the detriment of the seminar's finances or to your pockets because it is a part of seminar and you have to get it done. You are assessed on the success of those events. So it must be smart. So we're talking about goals that are specific. State exactly what, why, and how you want to achieve it. So when you come to us with your activities, these are the questions that we're going to ask. They must be specific. You must be able to measure them, assign a specific value. They must be attainable. So we're not talking about something that sounds good, but it must be able to be done. All right. Again, your task is very heavy as it relates to identifying the activities and executing them, seeing that we're all operating in a virtual space, but it can be done. Again, you must ensure that those objectives are attainable, realistic. Don't ignore your limitations. What are we currently limited by? We're limited by social interactions. We are also limited by technology. Even though we are in a virtual space, we are still limited by technology. We know that from time to time, the technology will fail us. I am here virtual doing a presentation that you are going to see that I'm not able to do in real time because of technology. But of course, we have to ensure that whatever we're doing can be done within a particular time frame. So they must also be timely. And let me pause here to talk about timely. We're not just planning events because we have to plan events. Timely events includes more than just a date. It includes being able to seek sponsorship for those events. It involves ensuring that we're not overburdening the seminar body. with too much to do in little time. So again, you need to plan ahead and communicate the plans so persons are aware of where their services will be needed. And so when it becomes time for us to execute, we don't have persons not showing up, or we don't have persons complaining and giving us less than what they are supposed to, because we did not communicate information in a timely manner. It is the same thing for activities that we're going to plan, and if we are putting them in a budget. All right, so earlier I said that we're talking about seminar and a little bit of the personal things that will help you in your daily lives. So we're talking about cutting out bad habits in order for us to stay within budget. And one of those bad habits is buying on impulse. So some of us, when we're stressed, frustrated, confused, tired, annoyed, sad, we buy things that we really don't need. So we buy it because at the time it feels good to spend the money, and that is what makes me happy. For some of us, we may stress eat. For some of us, we may drink alcohol or whatever it is that we may do. But what you're doing here is buying on impulse. All right, so what you see in here is well, not I, but the person is looking at bags of stuff that they just bought and they did not really need. So what you have to do here on a personal note is, if it is that you are a person who shops online, for example, when you're stressed, what you'll do is to tell yourself that you don't need the item. I don't need this item. I'm going to give myself a day and I'm going to come back. And after 24 hours, let's say you log on to that site, be it Amazon, be it Shein, be it Fashion Nova, be it Cheat Me, whichever site you use when you're shopping, if you are still having that bug, that feeling that I really don't need the item, then you're going to give yourself 7 days. And after 7 days, if you go back and you're still not sure if you should buy that item, give yourself a month. Within that month, you'll decide whether or not it is important or if it's a need to buy that item. And that's online. You walk into a store, and of course, those persons are very strategic in where items are placed. If you notice, majority of the places that you go to shop, they will have right at the cashier that nice little section with your sweets. Things that you would want to spend your money on, because now you have change from whatever it is that you just buy that you can use to spend. But do you really need it? No, you don't. So my recommendation is, tell yourself that you don't need it. Or if you are like me, if you know what you're going into the store to buy, then you walk with the exact money if it is that you are aware of the price. So you walk with that money and that money only, which forces you to only buy what you want. And again, if you stress and you like to go eye shopping, don't eye shop, because if you eye shop with money in your pocket, you may end up spending that money that you should not have spent. All right. And of course, I'm not telling you at this point that you should not treat yourself. That money that you have is as a result of your hard work. And so it is important as individuals that we treat ourselves occasionally. We treat ourselves occasionally. And of course, your savings should be treated as a compulsory expense. So you should ensure that you are saving. Now let's talk about the rules of ensuring that your budgets are on point and you ensure that at the end of the day, you are successful. We are saying here that we budget to avoid a loss. And of course, your loss would be realized even before the activity takes place, given what you expect to do and the revenue you expect to earn. Of course, I also want to say at this point that in planning and budgeting for those events, you have to ensure that you are being realistic about the event's income. And it says here, be prudent. Now, I wish I was doing this in real time, because this would have been a quiz question to you. What is prudence? You would have learned this in first year. And of course, I'm sure you're going to tell me, oh, miss, I did this so long ago. You're accounting students, what you learn should stay with you through the years. But of course, we're saying here, it's better to understate than to overstate your income. So you don't want to say that the event will turn income of $1 million, especially if we are unsure of how the take-up will be in the virtual space, seeing that there are so many events taking place that are free. Why would someone pay to attend your event? So you'd have to have a reason for your revenue or your income being that amount, and that must be justified or accepted. And lastly, if it can go wrong, it will go wrong. Let me repeat that. If it can go wrong, it will go wrong. So it says here that you should have a contingency plan. Your contingency plan will have what we call plan B, but I'm also going to include a plan C because plan B may not work either. Case in point, you are planning a virtual party, and that virtual party will require streaming from a company. Let's say that company is a company that a seminar member knows of and made contact on behalf of the seminar, and the person consented to being the person who will stream the event or the company that will stream the event for us. And on the day of the event or a day before the event, the company sends an email to say that they are unable to make it because the main person is ill, or let's say the person contracted COVID, which we know can happen, all right? So the person contracted COVID and is in quarantine. What are we going to do? This is a day before the event. Do we have a company on standby in the event that the company we procure cannot make it for whatever reason? If we don't, then of course, we will have problems. And of course, if this is an event that is a paid event, what are we going to tell our patrons if we are not able to deliver? So we have to have a contingency plan. Are we going to set up a meeting with the library in order for them to do the streaming for us, possibly at a cost? But of course, we would have to communicate this to our additional suppliers before the day of the event. And so we don't feel like we're running around as headless chickens trying to figure out what to do. So I'm gonna end here by repeating, whatever can go wrong will go wrong. All right, so the last part of my presentation looks at procurement. We're talking about procurement here. And again, this would have been a question to you. What do you know or think procurement is all about? So procurement is the act of obtaining or purchasing goods and services. Pause. This is a lot to take in. And for some of us, we may have been doing this, or we have done this before without thinking, oh, I'm procuring items. You know, it's just I'm buying items. Yes, it's procuring items. All right, so it says obtaining or purchasing goods or service. What does procurement involve? So procurement involves sourcing activities, negotiating and selecting goods and services from a particular supplier. And of course, we're talking about the importance of that good to the organization. So for your events that you are going to be hosting, we will have to look at the activities. So earlier I mentioned live streaming. So that's an activity. Negotiating and strategic selection of the service is also another aspect. Of course, you will have more than one company that provides that service. For your company, in this case, seminar, which is a part of Utech, so we consider it government, you need at least 3 to 5 quotations. Again, of course, if you are not able to get so many because of the number of persons who are able to supply the resource that you require, then we are okay with that. But of course, it should be that if there are more than one persons or companies that are able to provide the service we require, then we have to get quotations from those companies. If you are doing a sole supplier, it must be justified. So it says here, for the public sector, procurement is an essential activity that should go beyond the basic task of ordering and paying for goods and services to embracing timely and strategic planning processes that seek to identify and foster cost-saving opportunities in the acquisition of quality goods and services. All right, so we don't just want to buy because we don't just want to buy from a company because we know the owner or we know someone working in that company. Of course, we could be able to get a discount, but again, at the end of the day, the cost-saving opportunity is what we're looking for, hence why we are looking at different companies and their cost to provide that service. So what is your procurement plan? Your procurement plan is the document that we use to manage the process of finding and selecting a vendor. Now, the plan justifies the need for an external supplier, and it explains how the process of finding a supplier will be performed, from identifying the project requirements to closing the contract. So having identified the supplier, what's the first thing you're going to do? You're going to send them an email requesting a quotation. Once you have identified your quotation, or you have gotten your quotation rather, you are going to go through all those quotations if there is more than one supplier being in the market that is able to provide the good or service that we require. And we are going to look at the specifications of each quotation or of each offer before we make a decision. Once we have decided on that supplier, then we will now go into a contract with them. So the contract here is for them to provide a service to us at a cost that we will pay them. And of course, that's where our contract comes into place. Now, the goal of your procurement plan is to increase the efficiency, effectiveness, and transparency of the procurement process. So all of these are things that you are expected to do through the accounts and finance department, and also your other departments like your logistics department, who will be in charge of venue locations and securing PA systems and so on, if it is that you're having an event that will require a physical space. So all of these are items that you are expected to do as a part of your processes in seminar, especially as it relates to budgeting. Now, I am at the end of my presentation, and so I'll be in seminar, just not being able to do the presentation because of technology constraints. But if you have any questions, you could pose them here, or you could pose them after the video has ended, and I'll be here to answer those questions. I hope you learned something from the presentation, and thanks again for inviting me to do this presentation for you on budgeting.